Interested in collaborating with the esSENSE Global? Register your information using the QR code provided below.
Before we start thinking about solutions to problems that we face as non-believers, we should probably consider some context. So I want to offer you a perspective of how we came to this moment in American secular history. We can trace organized non-religion in America back to the 19th century. But organized non-religion in America really took off in the 1950s. Religious leaders of the day, especially the infamous Reverend Billy Graham, successfully lobbied the government to endorse religious beliefs. They were successful in creating an official National Day of Prayer, in adding "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, changing the national motto from "E pluribus unum," which is Latin for "from many, one people," and which, in my opinion, is a beautiful encapsulation of the idea of America. They changed it from "E pluribus unum" to the lie, that is, "in God we trust." This all happened in the 1950s. It was Madalyn Murray O'Hair who had come to national prominence, cast as a villain by mainstream American media, for winning her Supreme Court case that forced America's public schools to stop requiring children to recite Christian prayer at the beginning of the school day. O'Hair parlayed her notoriety into creating a national organization named American Atheists. And that American Atheists served to protect religious freedom for all Americans, not just atheists. Atheists, we tend to be sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to religious freedom. We are the ones who are maybe the most sensitive to that topic. And so it's no surprise that we should be the ones that should be in the vanguard fighting for religious equality. American Atheist was able to gain the support of atheists all over the nation and to push back at the creeping theocracy infecting our nation. American Atheists inspired other organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the American Humanist Association, to take a more activist role and to continue and expand on the mission that O'Hair had originally started. Following O'Hair's example of success, typically in court with lawyers, these organizations sought equality through court actions and public protests. So, of course, organized religion has for decades been pushing uphill. For most of that time, self-described atheists comprised a tiny fraction of the religious makeup of the nation. Institutional bigotry created an environment that discouraged citizens from considering leaving religion or to admitting that they were an atheist. Until around 2001, polls showed that the non-religious made up only around 3% of the population. But atheist organizations and individuals who ran them worked on despite the seemingly insurmountable struggle to gain religious equality. So then, suddenly, after 2001, there was an explosion of people willing to admit that they were not religious believers. This was largely the result of two major cultural events: the 9/11 attack and the revelation of widespread institutional child abuse on the part of the Catholic Church. 9/11 showed people how extreme religious beliefs were extremely dangerous, and the Catholic child abuse scandal proved the lie that religion makes people more moral. So suddenly, it was a virtue to not be religious, and polls started to reflect that. Self-identified atheists, agnostics, and nuns, none of the above, people who aren't interested in religion, quadrupled in less than a decade. And just like with the LGBTQ+ movement, the willingness of more people to come out and admit their identity has led to a knock-on effect of Americans increasingly identifying as non-religious. Now, numbers may vary from poll to poll, depending on how the question is asked, but we can reasonably assume from all of the available data that at least 17% of Michigan's 10 million residents are non-religious. So that makes non-religion one of the top 3 religious identities in Michigan, tied with Catholics and mainline Protestants. Yes, there are as many of us non-religious here in Michigan as there are Catholics or mainline Protestants. And that's where we find ourselves today, not as members of a tiny minority beset by religious inequality, but rather as members of a large group beset by religious inequality. The mainstream culture, by and large, has yet to catch up with these changes in religious belief and practice. In the media, for example, there are far more stories about Jews and Muslims, who together make up less than 4% of the population, than there are about atheists. This was true even before October 7th, the October 7th attack on Israel that kickstarted the most recent holy war in the Middle East. So this is mainly because while our numbers are high, we exist in a world that has been molded for centuries to favor the religious. Also, I hate to say this, but there is no lie or dirty trick that a zealous religious believer won't tell in order to maintain their religious privilege. Since before the 1950s, the religious majority has crafted a government and other social institutions that maintain religious privilege, even today, as religion fades from the demographics of the nation. It's time that the non-religious take their place in the religious landscape. So historically, non-religious individuals and organizations have often isolated themselves, and for good reason. Open atheists were frequently subject to unfair treatment, such as being fired for their beliefs, and atheist leaders were the targets of threats of violence and sometimes violence. While these challenges persist today, they're generally less severe in most places, for example, here in Southeast Michigan. So in the past, isolation made sense because we were a tiny minority. However, now that we present a significant portion of the population, it's time to shift from seeing ourselves as an underclass to seeing ourselves as a large constituency that rivals those of religious believers. This means participating in our culture just like everybody else, but as open atheists. Achieving full equality involves being visible and demonstrating that we care about the same issues as everyone else. And we are just like everyone else, just with a different perspective on the nature of the universe. So we need to humanize ourselves and show that we're decent human beings with the same rights to our lives and our freedom of conscience as anyone else. By doing this, we can reduce the reliance on lawsuits and sympathetic judges for achieving equality. Instead, society will come to our defense and stand against anti-atheist bigotry. This is the non-adversarial path to equality, much like the journey that the LGBTQ+ community, which gained broader acceptance through humanization and visibility. So what do we do now, right? Certainly, we still need to protect ourselves in any way that we can. In situations where we know that we'll be sanctioned for being an atheist, we should act accordingly, right? However, we must add a new strategy to our collection of approaches for achieving religious equality. If we continue to view ourselves as outsiders, that's how we'll be treated. Instead, we need to start acting like the major demographic that we are. We should openly reach out to local government officials, the news media, and even other religious organizations. We must do this without hiding, without shame, and with the same courage as our religious counterparts. By doing so, we assert our presence and our right to be a part of the broader community, reinforcing that we deserve the same respect and consideration as anyone else. Ultimately, if we can make connections with others who are not like us, then we can make allies who will defend us just as we would defend them. I encourage everyone hearing this to lobby your local government for fairness toward the non-religious. the non-religious. The next event you have, reach out to local media for coverage and start finding what you have in common with our fellow humans who are religious believers and lean into that. Engage with government, media, and the religious. The Secular Alliance of Michigan has been doing this for the past year, and in that short time, we've achieved results that exceeded expectations. For example, today, we have a representative from Troy city government here to support us. Earlier this week, I was invited to lunch from a mayor of a local city here to talk about forming a committee to review the policies, city policies regarding their entanglements with religion, if they have any policies that, or any interactions with religious organizations, or policies that favor religion in general. The mayor of Warren, Michigan's third largest city, has my phone number and calls me to discuss secular issues. A member of the county commission invited us to speak at an upcoming commission meeting. In the past year, I was invited to speak, just like Hirak mentioned. Excuse me, we're going too far. Just like Hirak mentioned, I was invited to speak at the National Day of Prayer event. Again, something that had never happened before. That kind of inclusion. These kinds of connections, again, they seemed unachievable. And these connections create an environment in which our concerns as non-believers are heard and considered. So, how do you do this? Right? That's the question. Here at SAM, we created what we named the Secular Advocacy Initiative that organizes non-believers to visit local governments and use the public comment time of government meetings to introduce ourselves and to explain why we care about secularism. We've been doing this for fewer than 6 months with a small group of dedicated atheists, and we have made significant progress, like I said before. I encourage you to start your own group in your region and use the same strategy, or even use that as a starting point and improve upon it. So interacting with the media is even simpler than interacting with government, right? AI tools like ChatGPT can format your next event announcement into a press release that you can email to the media contacts that you find online on their websites. One word of advice is always ensure that if you contact the press and they show up, that you have a prepared statement to share with them. Write it down and memorize it beforehand so that when you're interviewed, you'll make the point that you want and you won't digress or be unclear in what you want to say. So finally, find ways to come together with the religious rather than finding ways to segregate yourself. Imagine a nation composed of 50% non-religious and their allies, a majority of people. Remind everyone that you know that, as Daniel Dennett once said, the virtues they admire in some religious people are not the product of their religion, but rather the product of their humanity. We stand on the shoulders of giants, like Madalyn Murray O'Hair. And so many others that had to fight for inequality, many others in the past, many others like Madalyn Murray O'Hair had to fight for equality. But now we have numbers that our predecessors only dreamed of. Now is the time to seek common cause for equality. This is the course that our non-religious organizations and our fellow non-believers must now navigate. Today, we have open to us a new generation of non-believers, a new path that allows us to take a new direction and accomplish things that seemed unthinkable just a decade ago. Atheists and humanist groups can join interfaith groups. And can you raise your hand if you know what that is? What an interfaith group is? Just a few people. So let me tell you what this is. This is something that's been going on for a long time here in the United States, and it's spread around the world. Local groups of liberal religions band together to learn about each other's cultures and traditions. And this happens in every single community, in every single region across the United States, and probably in Canada. They're easy to find. You can go online, you can find your local interfaith group just by doing a judicious Google search of interfaith groups, and then maybe put your region or your city in there. And then approach these folks, contact them. Tell them that you're part of an organization like esSENSE Global, right? Or esSENSE Global USA. And tell them that you want to be involved, that you want to be included. So sometimes you have to jump through a few hoops to be a member of these organizations. Sometimes you have to participate for a certain amount of time. Again, the Secular Alliance of Michigan, we had to participate in, I think, 3 months of events with the Troy Interfaith group to be able to join that group. Some groups also have fees, annual fees. So for example, in my work for the Michigan Humanists on the other side of the state, we were a part of the West Michigan Interfaith Council, it was called, which was a regional group for all of Western Michigan. And then we had to pay, I don't know, it was $100, $200, it was a nominal amount to be a part of that group. And then of course, being a part of that group opens up an entire world that you may not know of. Again, I'm a lifelong atheist. The Christians would say that I'm unchurched. I've stepped foot in a church maybe, I don't know, half a dozen times, and probably half a dozen times were for weddings or funerals. You know, everything I know about Christianity is either what I read in a book or, you know, what I've learned from the greater culture. So what you'll find is that if you're like me and you really don't know what it's like to be an insider in a religion, is that you'll find that these interfaith groups tend to be a sort of a nexus between local governments and the community. And you'll find things like, for example, the city of Troy recently sent out an announcement about their summer programs that they were doing in their parks to the Troy Interfaith group, and then it was distributed to the members of that group. And so, again, as an isolated atheist group, we wouldn't have been informed about this. We wouldn't have known about this. So, you'll find that it opens up a lot of doors and a whole world of information and inclusion being a part of these. And then I'm going to say something that you might find a little controversial. You can do things as an individual as well. Don't let your fellow atheists make you feel guilty for joining your friends and family and attending religious services. Right? Do it, and do it as an atheist. If your conviction in the lack of good reasons to believe in religion is so tenuous that a Sunday sermon can tip the balance, then maybe you never really had conviction in the first place. So I know hundreds of atheists, and most of them are former believers, because once you know that religion is untrue, you can't go back to it. You can't unlearn the truth. Now more than ever, religious organizations don't care what you believe. When I was a kid, religion was all about creeds. You had to sign on, and take an oath or whatever to their creed. I agree in whatever, crazy fantasy that they believe. And you had to say it in front of everybody and proclaim it to the world. Nowadays, not so much. I did an interview with a local Christian leader here who told me that, for example, one of the members of his congregation is an open atheist who just likes to go there with his wife, who still is hanging on, So don't be afraid to do that. When it comes to belief, you can't fake it till you make it. That's a strategy that the religious try to use. This is a method that the religious use to encourage, doubters and the non-religious people to keep quiet, to keep them from revealing the reasons for their skepticism, right? To the other poor souls who have yet to get to that place in their journey where they're starting to figure this out, that most of this isn't true. So let me be clear about something. I'm not recommending that you join a church or a temple so that you can be a poison pill and disrupt their religion. I'm encouraging you to not be afraid of religion. It can't hurt you anymore. Now that you know that it's untrue, you can and should be respectful of the beliefs of your friends and loved ones, but you don't have to argue about belief, and you don't have to cause a scene. So you can just show your stoicism and your acceptance of freedom of conscience by being fully yourself, but not being a troublemaker. I know you say that the mere presence of non-believers is considered a troublemaker by some religious folks. In that case, do a George Washington. And I'm just going to make sure that everybody knows George Washington was the first president of the United States. I know we got a lot of people here from a lot of places. But George Washington, the first president, there's an apocryphal story of how Washington would regularly show up late to church. When the pastor complained to him that his late arrival was disrupting the services, Washington graciously apologized, promised never to arrive late again, and never went back. What you're going to find is that most of the time, if you can be kind and considerate, you will be met with curiosity and acceptance. In the same way that maybe your mere presence is considered an affront by some extreme religious zealots, the majority of liberal religious believers will treat your presence as welcome. And you may find that by setting an example of what it looks like to be an honest, good person and a non-believer, that you may embolden others to move away from their religious belief. You may be the example for a child who's been struggling with what the religious adults around them have been telling them, that a person can be whole, that a person can't be whole and moral without believing the unbelievable. The choice is not about when and where to pretend that you're a believer, but rather when and where to reveal your convictions. So I encourage you to let your mind be known whenever you're confronted with falsehoods or appeals to beliefs you know to be untrue. Just not in the middle of a sermon or in some setting where even believers are considered rude for interrupting. But in those spaces and cases where it's acceptable to reveal your opinions, like in private conversations with your acquaintances, friends, and families. Don't set out to argue, by the way. Don't take the bait if someone else tries to. You can state your conclusions as just that, as what you think, not what you think everyone else should think. Let others know that you accept their freedom of conscience, just as you hope that they accept yours. Try not to discuss in terms of how they're wrong, but rather how you can't believe what they believe. And make sure to let them know that you value them, that your beliefs include that love is more important than hate, that you value honesty over lies, that you care more about bringing people together than tearing them apart. And you hope that they share these values as much as you do. Then give them the time and the space to accept you. So there's a Christian Bible verse that starts off with, love is patient, love is kind. In our secular community, we joke about, with dark humor, about Christian love, we call it. About how, Christians make a big talk about love, but they often do so condescendingly or while doing hateful things to others. I encourage you to go out in the world and show everyone atheist love. So I'm going to end right there. If I'm not going to do a question and answer right now, I know that there's probably a lot of people here who are eager to challenge what I said or to ask me clarifying things, and I'm going to make you work for it. I will answer every single email that you send to my email address, right? chris.mclaughlin@secularalliance.org, right? So with that, I'm going to say thank you.